Alright, so Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out the best way to film and to process this and how to the right amount of research I should go into doing it. And obviously, a lot of these videos are pretty much unscripted, aside from just kind of a few cursory notes that I kind of scribble down on a notepad or it's sometimes it's even just kind of like nothing, and it's just kind of like it's just spur of the moment thing. And I find those are kind of best kind of suited for me because I think the more I stress out about making a script or something, the more I delay something. So it's like, okay, in a sense, like you get stuff like this where it's like, and now I'm just gonna dispense with doing that for now and just kind of go into it with the amount of knowledge that I have, simply because I have only finished it only a couple weeks ago. So my first Italo Calvino, and this is a excuse the cat. This is a 1979, and it was his last work, I think. So it's like I'm picking up odd that his most famous, maybe not his most, but it's pretty well known. I find it's a kind of first thing that I heard recommended to me, just through kind of word of mouth on the internet. And yeah, so this is kind of my first one by Calvino. That is very, very, very unique, very offbeat, eccentric. The narrative, it's a framing device that, like, right in the second you get into the world of If on a Winter Night Traveler, you get this. You open it up, you crack it open, and you're kind of already, there's the air of suspense, and you are waiting, and you're like, okay, so, and then this is what you get. So the first page, it says this, which I'll attempt to read aloud. You are about to begin Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Relax. Concentrate. Dispel every other thought. Let the world around you fade, but close the door. Best to close the door. The TV is always on in the next room. Tell the others right now. No, I do not want to watch TV. Raise your voice. They won't hear you otherwise. I'm reading. I don't want to be disturbed. Maybe they haven't heard you. With all that racket, speak louder. I'm beginning to read Italo Calvino's new novel. Or if you prefer, don't say anything. Just hope they'll leave you alone. So yes, and then he goes on, find the most comfortable position, seated, stretched out, curled up, or lying flat. Flat on your back, or on your side. For me, it's like flat, because like, there's like a weird kind of, personal anecdote about me. With me, it's lying down. I am not good at lying down, with like a little bit, so it's for some reason lying down on my side is just like, I don't know. But anyway, it's just personal kind of habit. But yeah, so yeah, he gets the mind of the reader. You get the sense that Calvino has had a long career, kind of a pretty thriving career, I believe, and he is one of the most popular, most translated Italian novelists of his time. And this is, I believe, a bit. I have heard Invisible Cities. It was one of his kind of best known works, and I intend to read that next. Yeah, it is it's completely just a staggering amount of. You get like the sense that he gets the reader, like he's like in the mind of like he understands, like, oh, he's privy with us, he's simpatico with what we know, like our distractions. And then he goes on. Now he goes on to narrate, and then he starts talking about the case between a man mixing up his briefcase with another guy at a train station, and this is where the traveler comes in, the namesake of the novel, and there is a mix-up with the baggage, and it is kind of decided there's like he can't find it, and then there's kind of a weird thing where he's like trying to track it down. He's trying to kind of, in a kind of serendipitous way, there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of different, but then it stops all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden you find out that the book that you're reading, Italo Calvino kind of interrupts with the narrative, and he's like, oh, here I'm back again. You might have noticed that what you're reading sounds oddly familiar, like you might have been reading, haven't I read this part? This is kind of a little bit the gist of what he says. Haven't I read this before? like this idea of somebody on, traveling throughout a train station, blah blah blah. Yes, we have read that before, and it's like, but aren't, then he goes on to kind of on another kind of long monologue about how it's rambling in classic Calvino style, and he's like, but isn't art just kind of already inherently derivative, and it's like it's kind of fixed to be. It's kind of, that's the way all novels are. Cormac McCarthy himself said books are built from other books. Like Famous Blood Murray, like one of the kind of the best, kind of well known, one of my favorites too, no doubt. But yeah, there's that takes, kind of borrows heavily from the imagery of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, another famous book, and who knows how much that might even borrow from another book. But I don't even want to get into that quite yet. But yeah, they just this idea that books are kind of they take a lot. They take even if we try to kind of dilute the amount of inspirations, like if we try to, like, okay, well, maybe I'm a little bit of maybe Dick here, but a little bit Dostoevsky there, or a little bit Gogol, or a little bit of Russian literature, but I'm a little bit Japanese literature, a little bit of Mishima, a little bit of Osamu Dazai, or maybe there's another Japanese literature I'm trying to think of, but like maybe you leaven it out, and then you can't really see that. But that's the kind of thing that Calvino seems to be privy to. Like, he understands our plight, this plight of, like, the novel, like the classic thing of, like, a novel has to have 3 acts, and this he's kind of, maybe, I don't know if this is probably right around the time of The Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell kind of drawing from a kind of neo-Jungian kind of myth and the analytic psychology of comparing religions, and who's a scholar of the religions, and like how the hero's myth is like a pretty consistently the same, and it's like very vaguely the same, and it's like we always fall into these traps of thinking, but just because that is a certain way, it doesn't mean it has to be, right? I mean, that's what I think Calvino, he doesn't mention like that by name, but he that kind of sentiment of, like, there has to be an introductory kind of a inciting act, inciting passage, or there has to be a prolonged kind of this, or a call to action, like, and you see this with, like, Bill, The Hobbit too, like, J.R.R. Tolkien, and all these different kind of, you see this with, obviously, Star Wars too, and it's kind of meant to be, I think, for, if this is why I don't think I would be wary of filming this, because in order to film this, it would be so exact. You have to go down to the exact right, inside the writer's head, and you have to be very metafictional. This is quite this is quite postmodern, but even for its time, 79. I don't think Don DeLillo really kind of broke onto the scene until, mid 80s, and Pynchon, well, maybe Pynchon too. I mean, Gravity's Rainbow was like 7 years earlier or something like that. So yeah, I mean, but this is postmodern, but in a way different style. It's like, this is vaguely on the same umbrella, but it's like totally different than Pynchon in some ways, because it's like, and Pynchon too, like, he draws some stuff like the Chinese Zodiac, and he's like talking about stuff that happened like in the Second World War, and like the V2 rockets, and the kind of the fear of all that, and I'm kind of waffling whether or not I should do a full review of that, of Gravity's Rainbow yet, but yeah, but Calvino seems to be going in a different direction of, like, the sentiments and the minds directly insights directly into the reader and the writer, and the dialectic between reader and writer. So, like I said, when he kind of interrupts this plot, and he's like, we interrupt this message, he ends up going to a kind of bookstore where the Italo Calvino, you end up reading that his book was actually, the thing you're reading is actually it's a kind of mess up, it's a defect on the printed book that you have received, and this book that you're reading before you is actually a Polish author, something by the name of, I can't remember the name of the Polish author that he used, but he was like, it was mixed up, so he kind of keys you in and says, like, well, now we have to figure out, and it turns into a kind of investigative kind of thing, a call to action in a sense, like, now it does kind of use that interesting kind of device, but it's all framing. It's used to kind of, there's a lot of deceptive stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's like more than meets the eye. So you end up kind of in a interesting kind of not fastidious, what's the word? Fortuitous, but a pleasantly fortuitous one at that adventure into finding out the real book, or where this actual has, because what actually happens is that the beginning of this book is swapped out, so like the first chapter, so you read the prologue or whatever, and it's just a little bit too much. Alright, the cat is kicked out. Alright, and we're still okay, so battery life, I believe, should be 20 minutes. I think 20 minutes, so. But yeah, so you have to dispel this myth that the reader is like, there is a big kind of quandary that the characters are. Some people who reviewed it thought that the characters were written a little bit flatly, like the main character, I had a few quotes on it. But the main, Alex, Irina, and Valerie, and then there's another writer by the name of Silas Connery, who seems to be a bit of a stand-in for Calvino, but I could be wrong. But there's a sense of like, people have said that the female character seems a little bit kind of flatly drawn, kind of just as a foil, just to kind of exist for the sake of feeding the male ego a little bit. But I'm not sure, because it seemed like Calvino seems a little bit too smart for that, to just kind of resort to that without at least being self-aware that he has used that trope. And if he did use that trope, he probably, I'm not, totally 100% well-versed in the sense to quite enough to make that judgment call or not, but I don't think he was like writing a woman just to kind of be, because she did seem to be like, the conversation between them as they talk about their kind of shared experience of like, having this Polish author's book instead, and then she's talking like, I actually like books that are like have a sense of mystique and mystery, but they make you think, or they make you do this, but like I don't want to read something that's like super depressing, but like, and then they kind of contrasting the different narrative, like the kind of readers that you might have, and that's kind of expounded on later in the book. But yeah, there's a lot of broken off, interspersed kind of diversions, where it's like it goes down one rabbit hole, leads to the other, and then you're like, there's a whole sequence with down in South America, I don't think it was Argentina, that they go down there, and there's like there's a character of I can't remember, there was like some kind of like coup or something, there was some kind of a royal kind of character, there was like a kind of, not a sultan, I don't know, I could be very well mixing this up with a different, I could be very well mixing this up with the other story about a man whose wife, the Sultan's wife, was very much interrupted, or required that people do not interrupt her reading, I think. And that was that the same thing? I'm sorry, I'm reading so many books this year that I kind of mix in the two. But there's like something to do with that. The Sultan's wife, there was like a kind of far off, distant, remote foreign land, and a lot that they were kind of mixing, that she was, kind of aristocratic enough, and to be able to kind of, do as you wished, and all she wanted to do was be left alone and read, kind of like the reader, kind of. And then she's like, there's a lot of different kind of, there's a lot of like, then that's cut off, and then there's a different narrative, and it's like the reader who is maybe the same Alex character who's brought in, who seems also to be maybe a stand-in for Calvino, who's like talking about the dread and the terror and like the obvious kind of overt like angst that he feels of not being able to write, and he's like the terror that I feel, like each anguish every day he wakes up, and he's like not being able to write. He's writer's block, and he's like talking about the dialectic between the writer, him, and the reader, and he's like, dang it, how can I? And then he looks down and he sees the woman that he is like, uses a kind of a spyglass for looking at occasionally, kind of a little bit creepy, but so, but at the same time, like his character is kind of a little bit unhinged, maybe. But then again, I guess aren't we all? But yeah, he's like looking back. He was like continuously looking at the woman reading peacefully. He envies that her ease of mind, that she's able to just focus and read. And like again, he goes into the head of like, how does she do that? Like, why is she? And again, like he's like, like you get the sense that Calvino really, really just kind of gets it. He gets the reader, like their plight, like what it's like to actually sit down and like focus on a novel, to like actually kind of process words and like process. And he envies, and like this character envies that, and in this sense, you get that he's like Calvino's empathetic towards the reader who's like a little bit stalwart, who's a little bit, grasps or struggles with the process of like just of paying attention, to offer up your time for something, to actually to look to like this strange thing that we've crafted over the years that's a collection of different, of the thoughts of somebody else, that we are, by culture, we're kind of, some of us pick it up and we do it kind of out of almost peer pressure, like in a weird way. It's like, oh, I want to read that Donna Tartt book because that's what people have said. Like people say good things about the Goldfinch, so I want to read it. That's actually something I want to. But yeah, we have these cultural kind of comeuppance if we don't do certain things, depending. So that's kind of like, I get the sense that maybe Calvino's privy to that as well. But yeah, it is it's such a lot of, there's so much kind of, like the process of writing, and what it's like, the kind of like alchemical process almost of like kind of making kind of, out of, from, making gold from base metals, gold being there, this kind of stuff. And like what it takes to do that. And like there's, with Calvino also kind of terrains, goes over the rough terrain, and it's like, one thing is that it was very hard for me to kind of differentiate where one story ended and where the other began. So like the story with, it's like you have to kind of stop and you have to like think, and it's great because I like books that make you think and process the situation, and not to just kind of glibly go to the next thing, because this is not a reflexive read. This is not like a relaxing beachside sunny, the sun is out, your sunglasses kind of, yeah, it's, it's not like a romance novel. Nothing against romance novels, but it's just, it's not that. So Calvino, he's making you kind of like investigate, to do your own work, to do your own kind of almost like journalistic kind of endeavor into kind of inquiries into figuring out what's going on. It's like a mystery, and he's like, but it's also a lampoon of mysteries. So you're like getting this thing of like, it's like you're like putting together the different pieces and the puzzle pieces, and you're trying to kind of make an amalgam, and you're trying to put everything into some sensible, cohesive whole. And then even that, like in that Gestalt kind of way, you end up finding that there is nothing that to be seen. Maybe it's all just to kind of, I find that all the things there's like, there is a, what's the word, a kind of, right before there's the denouement, the kind of right before you expect there to be a denouement where everything comes to a head and everything starts to kind of make sense in some way, and you expect to be like, oh, and that happens, and in the end there's a, spoiler alert, there are, all the readers come together, and they all come together and they talk about their experience reading If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, and they all talk about, I liked the fact that this narrator, like, there's like a kind of sensible old man that's but kind of average, and talks about his experience, and like there's another experience of an old lady that talks about her experience and how she reads and how she liked certain aspects of the novel that differed for her, or that stuck out, and all these different people kind of come together, and there's like I like that there's a conclusive kind of thing to all this, because it's like it all seemed to be kind of bubbling up, and it's like it all seemed to be, is it like in a postmodern thing that there's like just an infinite amount of different ways we can view this, or is an infinite amount of interpretations that we can glean from this, and that we can just kind of constantly mine from, or it, as like as there are with Kafka, Metamorphosis obviously has like it could be about Jewish political exile, being and persecution, or what it's like to be a political prisoner in the sense of turning into a bug, into a vermin kind of beetle bug, and then there's another sense of it of that same story being a religious metaphor, but like a kind of spiritual transformation, the spiritual metamorphosis. So you have these different layering on top, like different ways it's Kafka wrote it that he didn't quite. I love that he left as a mystery for us to kind of digest and ingest and to kind of chew on, like to make you think. And I think with Calvino, there's like a lot of different ways. I think there's almost like a hyper kind of thing where it's like a little bit too much. I think for my taste of like, it was just a little bit too much kind of trying to piecing together all these different splintering, rambling narratives, which were pleasant ramblings. It was kind of this is what my cerebral approximation of. Let me just check this real quick. My cerebral approximation of this was that it was like walking into a kind of very huge, commodious home, and you're kind of like, you see like maybe a few like interesting kind of halls that kind of go off in their own kind of discursive way, and it's like you're kind of going down a labyrinth in a way, kind of whorehouse kind of labyrinth. But then you meet like an old guy who's kind of like, like how's it going, my old friend? Like, what can I do for you today? And he's like kind of just he's kind of waxing poetic about different things, and he's like he just tells you like part of his life story, and it's like, and then you walk off to another kind of corner of the house, and there's like another kind of eccentric old person that's like, how are you doing? And then you embark on several more of those kinds of things, and like that, I feel like every human being, and this is the beauty of all this, I think, is that every human being is their self-contained narrative with their own inner stories and their own inner monologues and their own thought processes and everything. And this is why I love certain things about postmodern kind of literature like this, is because it's like it understands that, like that every person differs. Their reading style differs. Their writing style, if they write, is like everybody differs. I mean, we all have these universal things that we all are, obviously, we all have our own kind of contrasting kind of qualities as well. And universal things that we are combined in our own kind of, I guess, kind of, we all have our own, kind of differences that are like might not register to whole lot of people, but like we only see the kind of very artifice kind of surface of that. So that's kind of what, there's like a lot of different ways to view this novel. It's brilliant, definitely brilliant. I mean, definitely is something to be read and reread. And I'm hoping to put like kind of more kind of to kind of relax a little bit more into this and ease into a little bit more reading it to, because when I came in, I wasn't quite expecting that kind of rush. But it was welcomed. I liked it. It was a challenging kind of, like I said, fortuitous read. Like there was like you did not know what was going to happen next. It was like there was no predictable. It was totally unpredictable, in the best ways. And for the parts that were hard to read, like the parts that were hard to piece together, if you do kind of shut off, or if you do kind of put in the time and the sacrifice a little bit into reading this kind of stuff, it does kind of pay off in a way. So, but yeah, that is all I have for today for Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. I was going to quote you, but you can always just kind of look up the quotes for yourself, and I don't quite want to kind of do that injustice by kind of misquoting apart from it. But yeah, this is I definitely recommend it, like I said, and that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching.